Her hands were the only thing keeping him alive, but saving the heir to a billion-dollar empire would cost Nurse Amara Jones everything. First her job, then her reputation, then they came for her citizenship. This is what happens when you pull the wrong man back from the edge and his family decides you are the problem. Amara Jones was a night shift nurse in Seoul, a healer from halfway across the world. The patient in room 404 was Min Jun, the sole heir to the Yegun conglomerate, comatose after a violent crash. Her skilled care pulled him back, but when he opened his eyes and saw only her, a bond formed that his billionaire family would view as an act of war. This is the story of how saving a life can make you a target, and what happens when love is treated as the ultimate corporate threat. Amara arrived in Seoul on a work visa, her nursing qualifications from Kingston, a ticket to a better life. The Samsung Medical Center ICU was her domain from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., a world of hushed beeps and fragile hope. She was good at the quiet vigilance it required. The patient in bed 4, however, brought a different kind of silence, one enforced by money and power. Min Jun Kang, 28 years old. Suffering a severe traumatic brain injury after his sports car left the road in Gangnam, admitted under strictest confidentiality. His room, at the end of the hall, was always flanked by 2 men in dark suits who spoke to no one. For 3 weeks, Amara managed his intracranial pressure, adjusted his ventilator, and spoke to him as if he could hear. Standard protocol, she told herself, but there was something about the utter stillness of him, the way the family visited like a board meeting, his mother, Chairman Kang Seo-yun, with a tablet instead of flowers, his uncle reviewing charts with the hospital director, that made her talk more. She told him about the rain in Jamaica, about her mother, who was also a nurse, about the overwhelming neon of Seoul. It was just a voice in the dark. Then on night 22, his stats spiked. A sudden fever, the on-call resident was delayed. Amara saw the early signs of sepsis, a deadly infection, hours before the lab work would confirm it. Protocol said to wait. Her instinct said the wait would kill him. She initiated aggressive antibiotic therapy and a cooling protocol on her own authority, a gamble that could end her career if she was wrong. By morning, the fever broke. The resident, and later the furious head of the unit, credited her swift action with saving his life. The family was informed. They sent a formal letter of thanks to the hospital administration. Amara thought that was the end of it. It was the beginning. Min Jun Kang woke up 2 days later. Not dramatically, but slowly, his gaze unfocused until it landed on Amara adjusting his IV line. He didn't speak, he just watched her. And when his mother rushed in, followed by a team of specialists, his eyes tracked back to Amara at the door. In the following days, as he regained speech, he was often agitated, confused, a common post-coma symptom called delirium, but he settled only when Amara was in the room. He'd follow her with his eyes, his breathing easing. The family noticed. His mother, Chairman Kang, initially grateful, now watched these interactions with a new, calculating silence. The first real conversation was on a Tuesday. Amara was checking his pupil response. His hand, weak, came up and brushed hers. "Your voice," he said, the words slurred but clear. "I heard it. In the dark, it was a rope." Amara froze, her professional mask slipping for a second. She recovered, giving a standard therapeutic response, but the line had been crossed, from patient and caregiver to something else, something seen. He began asking for her, not by name at first, the night nurse, then Amara. His family would visit during the day, talking of mergers and recovery timelines, and he'd be non-committal. But at night, he'd ask Amara questions, real ones. "Why did you come here? Are you afraid of them?" He was piecing his world back together, and for reasons no one understood, he was using her as the anchor. The Kang family's strategy shifted subtly. A private nurse, a specialist flown in from Switzerland, was suggested to oversee his night care. Min Jun refused, flatly, his first act of defiance since the accident. The family relented, but the atmosphere around Amara chilled. The security guards, who had never acknowledged her, now watched her. Her charting was scrutinized by a new hospital compliance officer with ties to the Kang conglomerate. A small medication error, a common enough oversight in a busy ICU, was documented in her file with unusual prominence. Then came the gift, a small, elegant box from a department store delivered to the nurse's station. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, The card read simply, "Thank you for being my rope." Amara's heart sank. It was wildly inappropriate, a breach of ethics. She immediately logged it with her charge nurse and attempted to return it. The next night, Minjun looked at her, his clarity startling. "You sent it back." He didn't seem angry, just resigned. "They told you to, didn't they?" "It's the policy, Mr. Kang. It's not personal." "Everything with them is personal," he said, looking toward the door where a suit stood sentry. The following evening, Chairman Kang Seo-yun was waiting for Amara in the family consultation room. Not the hospital director, not a lawyer, just the matriarch impeccably dressed, her hands folded on the table. "Sit, Nurse Jones." The air was cold. "My son is vulnerable. His judgment is impaired. This attachment, it is a symptom of his injury. It is not real." Amara nodded, agreeing professionally, but the chairman continued. "Your care has been adequate. But adequate is no longer what we require. We will be transferring him to a private facility in Switzerland at the end of the week. Your services will no longer be needed." Amara felt the floor tilt. The threat was clear, but so was the opportunity. If he was transferred, her strange, tense link to him would be severed. She could go back to a normal life. She simply nodded again. "I understand. I'll prepare the transfer notes." It should have ended there. But when she told Minjun about the transfer during her rounds, his reaction was not confusion. It was cold, lucid fury. "No." He pressed the call button. When his mother and uncle entered, he spoke with a voice they hadn't heard since before the accident, the voice of the heir. "Cancel the transfer, I am not going." His mother began to protest. He cut her off, his eyes finding Amara. "If she is removed from my care team, I will hold a press conference from this bed. I will discuss my recovery. I will discuss the sepsis no one else caught, and I will name the person who saved me." The room went utterly silent. It was blackmail, corporate public relations blackmail. The Kang Empire was built on a pristine image. A combative, mentally unstable heir airing private medical grievances was a nightmare. Chairman Kang's face was a mask of ice. She looked from her son to Amara, and in that look, Amara saw the gratitude vanish. She was no longer a nurse. She was a problem to be managed, a threat to the brand. The transfer was cancelled. Amara kept her job, but the war had been declared, and she was now standing directly in the crossfire. The very next day, as she left the hospital at dawn, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up slowly beside her. The rear window slid down, not Minjun, not the chairman. It was his uncle, Kang Jae-hoon, the family's fixer. He didn't smile. He simply held up a single sheet of paper, a copy of her work visa application, and then made a show of slowly, deliberately tearing it in half. The window rolled up. The car pulled away. Amara stood on the curb, the cold soul morning air biting through her scrubs, holding the shattered pieces of her life in her mind. They weren't just coming for her job anymore. They were coming for her right to be in the country, and she had nowhere left to hide. The torn visa was a message, not an action. Yet, the real attack began in the daylight, through channels that wore suits and spoke in legal terms. 3 days after the uncle's curbside threat, Amara was called into the hospital director's office. 2 men from the Korean Immigration Service were there. Her file was open on the desk. "Nurse Jones," the director began, his voice strained. "There are irregularities, questions about the authenticity of your nursing board certification from Jamaica." Amara's blood ran cold. Her credentials were impeccable. She had the notarized, apostilled documents in her apartment, but the immigration officer slid a grainy photocopy across the desk. It was a letterhead from the Jamaican Nursing Council, but the registration number was wrong. A digit was off. "This is a forgery," she said, her voice shaking. "The real document is." "We have received an anonymous tip," the officer interrupted. "Until this is resolved, your work authorization is under review. You cannot be employed in a clinical setting." She was suspended, effective immediately, not fired, that would be too direct, too actionable. Suspended pending investigation, a process that could take months, during which she would have no income, no legal right to work, and her visa would inevitably lapse. It was a death by bureaucracy. As she cleared her locker, the charge nurse, a woman who had always been fair, pressed a slip of paper into her hand. On it was a name, Attorney Park Jae-won, and an address in Jongno. "She handles cases like yours," the nurse whispered, not meeting her eyes. "Don't call from the hospital phone." Amara's world shrank to the four walls of her tiny Gashiwan studio. She met with Attorney Park, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s. "This is a classic pressure tactic," Park said, reviewing the fake document. "They create a bureaucratic problem that is slow, expensive, and humiliating to fix. The goal is not to deport you today. The goal is to make you give up and leave." Or, she looked at Amara, "to make you desperate enough to do something stupid that would give them a real, legal reason to deport you." Meanwhile, Minjun was being moved through his recovery in a vacuum. His family told him Amara had been transferred to a different hospital due to a staffing shortage. He didn't believe them. His first independent act was to bribe an orderly with a watch worth more than a car to get a message out. The note, scribbled on a medication sheet, found its way to Amara's doorstep. It read, "Tell me where you are, M." She didn't reply. Attorney Park advised against it. Any contact could be twisted into harassment of a vulnerable patient. But the note was a lifeline. He was looking for her. The Kang family's next move was social. A society column in the Chosun Ilbo published a brief, glowing item about Minjun Kang's remarkable recovery, thanks to the dedication of his family and a top-tier Swiss medical team. No mention of Samsung Medical Center. No mention of a night shift nurse. Amara Jones was erased from the official story. Then, a week later, a follow-up piece. It mentioned the distressing incident of a foreign caregiver who had become overly attached to the patient, requiring administrative intervention to ensure his peaceful recovery. The language was careful, but the implication was clear. She was unstable, a stalker. The smear campaign had begun. Amara saw her name, her professional reputation, being dismantled in print. She felt it in the silence from her former colleagues. No one called. Her savings evaporated. The rent was due. Attorney Park worked on contingency, but the legal fees for authenticating documents overseas were mounting. Desperation, as predicted, set in. She took a job under the table at a rundown J Jimjilbang cleaning bathrooms for cash. It was there, scrubbing floors, that she was found by Kang Jae-hoon, the uncle. He didn't need a black sedan this time. He just walked into the steamy lobby in his $1,000 shoes. "This is beneath you, Nurse Jones," he said, his voice almost conversational. "You are a trained professional. This," he gestured at the mop bucket, "is a waste. My nephew is improving. He will forget this infatuation. Leave now with a settlement. We will pay you $100,000. You return to Jamaica, your record is cleared, and you can start over. A clean end." It was a fortune. It could buy her mother a house, set up a clinic. It was also a trap. Taking money would be construed as an admission of guilt of something. It would give them a signed release, a forever silence. "No," Amara said, her voice quiet but clear in the humid air. "I didn't do anything wrong. I want my job back. I want my name cleared." Jae-hoon's congenial mask vanished. "Then you will have nothing," he said, "and you will leave with less than nothing. You have 1 week before the immigration hearing. The evidence against your credentials is quite compelling. I suggest you be on a plane before then." The pressure was a physical weight, but that night, a different kind of message arrived. Not a note, but a package, left with the Gashiwan manager. Inside was a brand new prepaid smartphone. It buzzed once as she turned it on. A single text message from an unknown number, the security feed from the hospital admin office. The day the fake document was filed. Look at the timestamp. Attached was a video file. It showed the hallway outside the director's office. A man in a suit, one of Kang's security detail, walked in with a folder. He emerged 20 minutes later without the folder. The timestamp was 3 days before the immigration officers claimed to have received their anonymous tip. The family hadn't just submitted a tip, they had planted the evidence. This was it, proof of malicious fabrication. Attorney Park was ecstatic. This is grounds for a criminal complaint, for coercion, for defamation. This changes everything. But how did Amara get it? Who sent it? The phone buzzed again. The orderly works for me now. M. Minjun, he wasn't just looking for her. He was fighting back from inside the fortress. He had turned his own family's surveillance apparatus against them. With this evidence, Attorney Park filed an urgent counter-complaint with the Immigration Service and a separate criminal complaint for falsifying documents. The reaction was not vindication, it was escalation. The The Kang family's lawyers descended, portraying Amara as a manipulative schemer who had now hacked into private security systems to fabricate evidence. They threatened a countersuit for invasion of privacy and cybercrimes, carrying potential jail time. The story in the press turned darker. Vengeful nurse hacks hospital in bizarre blackmail plot. The institution was now fully aligned against her. The hospital, fearing its own liability, officially terminated her contract for misconduct related to the unauthorized acquisition of confidential data. Her legal visa status, tied to that employer, was instantly voided. She received a formal notice from immigration. She had 15 days to voluntarily depart the country or face forcible deportation and a 10-year ban. They had played the legal game to a checkmate. Attorney Park looked defeated. "We can fight the deportation order in court, but it will take a year, maybe two. You cannot work. You cannot leave. You will be in legal purgatory. They will bury us in motions. They can afford to wait. You cannot." Amara stood at the window of her tiny room, the deportation order in her hand. She had run out of moves. Then the prepaid phone buzzed. A new message, not text this time, a location pin, a private address in Hanamdong, Seoul's most exclusive neighborhood, and a time 10 p.m. tonight. The final line, "Come, they are watching your apartment. They are not watching here. We need to talk, face to face. M." It was either a trap or her only remaining chance. Going there would break every rule her lawyer had set. It would give the family everything they wanted, proof of her obsession, of her showing up at his private home, but staying meant defeat. The clock on her 15 days was ticking. She looked at the location on the map, a fortress within a fortress. If she walked in, she might never walk out, but if she didn't, she was already gone. She went, dressed in dark clothes, paying a taxi with the last of her cash. Amara approached the Hanamdong address, a minimalist mansion behind a high wall. The gate clicked open as she approached, as if she'd been expected, and scanned. Inside, the house was a museum of silence and sharp edges. A housekeeper, her eyes downcast, led her to a room that was all glass overlooking a darkened garden. Min-jun stood by the window, silhouetted. He turned. He looked older, harder than the man in the hospital bed. The softness of convalescence was gone, replaced by a wire-taut tension. "You came," he said. His voice was the same, but the weight behind it was new. "You left me no choice." "There's always a choice," he replied. "You chose to fight, that's why you're here." He didn't move to touch her, he just watched her, as if gauging her stability. Then he gestured to a chair. "We don't have long, the house is monitored, but this room is on a separate, isolated system. For 30 minutes, we can talk." He explained the accident hadn't been an accident. His brakes had been tampered with. He'd had his suspicions, but his coma had given his uncle Jae-hoon and a faction of the board free rein to consolidate power. His mother, the chairman, was caught between saving her son and saving the company from a civil war. Min-jun's attachment to Amara was a problem not because of who she was, but because of what she represented, an independent variable. A person loyal to him, not to the Kang Empire. In their world, that made her a weapon, and they couldn't allow him to have a weapon they didn't control. "They're not trying to drive you away because they hate you," he said, his voice low. "They're trying to drive you away to prove to me that I have no power, that even the people who saved my life belong to them." He had been using his recovery to quietly investigate. The fake nursing certificate, traced to a shell company owned by his uncle's lawyer. The negative press, placed by the family's PR firm. He'd gotten the security footage by bribing the hospital's head of IT, who was now on his payroll. Min-jun was building a case, not just for her, but for his own survival. "When I threatened that press conference, I wasn't bluffing. But I need more, I need you." He laid out a proposal. He would use his personal wealth, held in offshore trusts his family couldn't touch, to fund her legal battle. He would provide evidence to Attorney Park to sue for wrongful termination and defamation. But she would have to become a public figure. She would have to tell her story, on record, to a journalist he trusted. It would draw the family's fire completely onto her, but it would also expose their tactics to the world. It was the one thing they truly feared, sunlight. "It's dangerous," he said. "They will come at you harder, but it's the only way to fight a shadow war. You have to become too visible to disappear." Amara felt the enormity of it. She was a nurse, not a revolutionary, but she looked at him, at the fierce, desperate hope in his eyes, and saw the man who had fought his way out of a coma only to find himself in a different kind of prison. She nodded. Okay. The 30 minutes were up. He handed her a new phone, a secure model. Use this. Attorney Park will be contacted. The journalist's name is Choi Soon-chel. He'll meet you tomorrow. He hesitated, then reached out, his hand hovering near her arm. I am sorry for all of this. I pulled you into my darkness. Before she could answer, an alarm flashed silently on a panel by the door. His head snapped up. They're coming. The main gate. Go out through the garden. There's a car waiting at the south wall. It will take you somewhere safe. She fled through the sliding glass door, across the dark lawn. As she climbed over a low wall into a waiting sedan, she looked back. The mansion's front drive was flooded with light, 2 black SUVs pulling in. They had been tracked. The safe house was a modest apartment in a nondescript neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, Amara slept through the night. The next morning, the plan swung into motion. Attorney Park, now backed with Minjun's resources, filed a major civil lawsuit against the Kang conglomerate, the hospital, and several individuals for conspiracy, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages sought were astronomical. It was a declaration of war in the language they understood: money. Then she met Choi Soon-chel, an investigative reporter for a major online news outlet. Over 3 days, she told him everything: the medical care, the waking, the bond, the torn visa, the fake documents, the smear campaign. She provided documents, the security footage, everything. She was terrified, but the words, once she started, felt like shedding a weight. The article published at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was exhaustive, meticulously sourced, and damning. It framed the story not as a scandalous romance, but as a case study in power abuse. How a billionaire family used every lever, immigration, media, the legal system, to crush a vulnerable employee who had done nothing but her job. It went viral within the hour. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Public sentiment, fueled by a pervasive resentment toward the *Keyboard elite, swung hard in Amara's favor. The hashtag Justice for Nurse Amara trended. The hospital's social media was flooded. The Immigration Service issued a statement saying they would review the new evidence. For 2 days, it felt like victory. Then, the counterpunch. The Kang family didn't deny the story. They reframed it. They held a press conference. Chairman Kang Seo-yeon, dressed in summer colors, stood at a podium. Her voice was steady, dripping with maternal pain. She confirmed that her son had suffered a profound brain injury. She confirmed that Nurse Jones had provided care. Then, she dropped the revelation that changed everything. In his vulnerable state, my son became psychologically dependent on his primary caregiver. This is a known medical phenomenon called transference. We, as a family, saw this developing and sought to protect him by transitioning his care. What followed was a campaign of manipulation. We have evidence that Nurse Jones, upon being removed, began to exploit this dependency. She displayed blown-up photos on screens: Amara entering the Hanam-dong house, Amara getting into the waiting car. She sought him out at his private residence. She is now being funded by him, via hidden accounts, to wage this legal battle. This is not a story of corporate bullying. It is a tragic story of a patient exploited and a family trying to protect their son from a predator who saved his life only to try and control it. The narrative flipped in an instant. The story was no longer about a powerful family. It was about a cunning, dangerous woman and a brain-damaged victim. The comments online turned toxic. Gold digger, master manipulator. She planned this from the start. Worse was to come. The family's lawyers filed a criminal complaint against Amara for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and stalking. They petitioned the court to have Minjun declared temporarily incapacitated, giving his mother control over all his assets, effectively cutting off Amara's funding and his ability to help her. The legal walls were closing in from a new direction, and then the final personal blow landed. A package arrived at the safe house. Inside was a stack of photographs: her mother's house in Kingston, her younger sister leaving her school. Each photo was time-stamped from the past 48 hours. There was no note. None was needed. They had found her family. They were showing her they could reach anywhere. The message was clear: Drop the lawsuit, disappear, or your family will pay the price. Amara sat on the floor of the safe house, the photos scattered around her, the world she had built crumbling in every direction. She had fought the system, the courts, the media, but this was a line she couldn't cross. She picked up the secure phone Min-jun had given her. She had to warn him. She had to give up. But when she turned it on, a news alert popped up. It was live footage. Min-jun Kang, surrounded by a scrum of reporters outside the Seoul Central District Court. He looked directly into the cameras, his jaw set, and said 7 words that would detonate the entire conflict. "I am not a victim, I am a witness." Those 7 words, "I'm not a victim, I am a witness," cut through his mother's narrative like a scalpel. He didn't give a speech, he gave a timeline. Standing on the courthouse steps, Min-jun Kang laid out the entire operation, point by point, to the assembled media. The date the fake nursing certificate was fabricated, the name of the PR firm that planted the defamatory stories, the bank transfers from his uncle's discretionary fund to the hospital administrator who had filed the complaint. He named names. He presented what he called a preponderance of evidence that would be filed with the prosecutor's office within the hour. His performance was calm, lucid, and devastating. It was the act of a CEO, not a victim. The footage aired everywhere. The effect was instantaneous. The public narrative, so recently turned against Amara, spun wildly again. This wasn't a story about a manipulative nurse anymore. It was a Shakespearean drama of a family tearing itself apart. The Kang Group's stock price began a sharp, precipitous drop in after-hours trading. Behind the scenes, the legal and institutional dominoes began to fall. Faced with Min-jun's specific, evidence-backed allegations, the Immigration Service abruptly suspended its deportation proceedings against Amara and announced an internal review. The hospital board, terrified of liability and public outrage, convened an emergency meeting. They voted to settle Amara's wrongful termination lawsuit for a substantial, undisclosed sum, and to issue a public apology for failing to protect an employee from external pressure. The criminal complaint against Amara for exploiting a vulnerable adult was dismissed by a skeptical judge within 48 hours. The petition to have Min-jun declared incapacitated was withdrawn by the family's own lawyers, who cited new considerations. The power in the room had shifted. The family's strategy of using shadowy pressure and legal bureaucracy relied on secrecy and plausible deniability. Min-jun had dragged it all into the light. He moved out of the family home that night, taking up residence in a corporate apartment. He was met not by security guards, but by a new team of lawyers and his own, personally vetted security detail. The civil war within the Kang Empire was now open. For Amara, the relief was a physical shock. The deportation threat vanished. The settlement from the hospital meant financial security, but the photos of her family in Jamaica still burned in her mind. She called her mother, voice trembling, to tell her to go stay with relatives, to be careful. Her mother, who had been following the news online with growing horror, simply said, "Baby, you stood up. Now we stand with you." It was the first time Amara broke down and cried. The criminal investigation Min-jun triggered began in earnest. Prosecutors, now armed with his evidence and under intense public scrutiny, started calling in members of the Kang family for questioning. The uncle, Jae-hoon, was the first. He resigned from the conglomerate's board to focus on his legal defense. The story was no longer about a nurse. It was about corporate corruption and abuse of power. Amara and Min-jun did not see each other for 2 weeks. They communicated through their lawyers and the secure phones. The space was necessary. The intensity of the crisis had fused them together. Now they needed to see what was left when the pressure eased. Their first meeting was in Attorney Park's office to discuss the final disposition of the civil case. He looked tired but clear-eyed. She felt steady for the first time in months. They talked logistics, then fell silent. "What now?" Amara finally asked. "Now," Min-jun said, "I have to rebuild a company, and you should have your life back. Your license will be reinstated. You can work anywhere." "Is that what you want?" she asked, the question hanging between them, loaded with all the unsaid things. He looked at her, really looked at her, without the filter of crisis. "No," he said quietly, "but it's what I can offer, a clean slate. no more battles. Amara realized then that he expected her to leave, to take the money, the cleared name, and go. To him, his world was still a poisoned thing he had to fix alone. She stood up and walked to the window. "You told me to become visible so I couldn't disappear," she said. "I did. I'm not disappearing now. And I'm not letting you fight the rest of this alone because you think you have to. That's what they want, for you to be alone." The dynamics of their relationship had irrevocably changed. She was no longer his nurse. He was no longer her patient. They were allies who had survived a war. What grew from that would have to be built, not born from crisis. The final act played out in a closed-door hearing with the Korean Medical Board. Amara was there to give testimony about the pressure placed on her clinical judgment. Min-jun was there as a witness. So was his mother, Chairman Kang Seo-yeon, compelled to attend. It was the first time Amara had seen her since the press conference. The woman looked diminished, her authority replaced by a stiff, defensive pride. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she didn't talk about the lawsuits or the harassment. She talked about the sepsis. She described the clinical signs, the split-second decision, the protocol she broke to save a life. She spoke as a nurse, pure, professional, and unassailable. She concluded by saying, "I believed my primary duty was to my patient's life. I still believe that. The pressure I faced afterward does not change the medical reality of that night." It was the perfect testimony. It reminded everyone in the room of the simple, profound truth at the center of the hurricane. She had done her job brilliantly. The board not only fully exonerated her, they issued a formal commendation for her clinical initiative. It was a complete restoration of her professional honor. As they left the hearing, Chairman Kang approached them in the marble hallway. She ignored Amara completely, speaking only to her son. "You have gutted this family for a stranger," she said, her voice low and bitter. Min-jun's reply was calm. "I am trying to save what's left of it from becoming a monster. That started with stopping you from destroying an innocent woman." He paused. "The board is voting next week on the separation of the group's assets. Your shares will be respected, but you will no longer have operational control." It was his final move. He was breaking up the empire to save it from itself and to neuter the source of the power that had been weaponized against them. His mother stared at him, seeing not her son, but the successor she had created, one who had finally surpassed her. She turned and walked away without another word. In the quiet aftermath, life began to take new shape. Amara chose not to return to the high-pressure ICU. With part of her settlement, she helped fund a small non-profit legal aid clinic for migrant healthcare workers, people who faced similar vulnerabilities but had none of her resources. She served on its board. It gave her purpose beyond the drama. Min-jun, having successfully split the conglomerate and assumed leadership of its core technology division, focused on rebuilding with transparent governance. The scandals had cost the family billions and untold reputation, but it had freed him. They started slowly: dinner without bodyguards, a walk along the Han River, conversations that weren't about evidence or strategy, but about books and childhood memories and the strange stillness of life after a storm. And here is the final, surprising detail. A year after the hearing, Amara received a formal, hand-delivered envelope. It was from the Kang family office. Inside was a deed, not for property, but for a charitable foundation in her name, endowed with a staggering sum. Its mandate was to investigate and advocate against the weaponization of immigration and licensing systems against foreign professionals. The foundation's board was independent. She had full discretion. Attached was a single line on a separate card, in Chairman Kang Seo-yeon's precise handwriting: "A nurse should not have to fight a war. This is a truce." It was not an apology, it was a treaty, an acknowledgement that Amara Jones was a permanent force to be reckoned with. She had not just survived the Kang family, she had changed the rules of engagement. She accepted the endowment, and the foundation's first case was a Filipino physical therapist facing nearly identical credential sabotage. As for Min-jun and Amara, theirs was not a fairy tale ending. It was a careful, deliberate beginning. They had seen the worst of each other's worlds. The trust they built was forged in the fire of mutual defense, not just affection. Sometimes, late at night, Amara would still wake from a dream of tearing paper, and Min-jun would still tense at the sight of a black sedan. They were healing, not healed. But on a bright soul morning, Amara stood outside the clinic that bore her name, watching a new group of migrant workers attend a Know Your Rights seminar. Her phone buzzed. A message from Minjun: "Dinner tonight, I'll cook, no bodyguards, just us." She smiled, a real, unburdened smile. She had saved a life and it had cost her everything. But in the wreckage, she had found something rarer, a self she respected and a peace she had earned. Her hands, which had once kept him alive, were now building a new life. For herself and for others, the war was over. The story of Amara Jones and Minjun Kang is more than a dramatic clash of worlds. It is a blueprint of how power operates when it feels threatened, and how that power can be dismantled piece by piece when met with unwavering truth. We saw a system designed to isolate, to intimidate, and to exile, using immigration, media, and legal bureaucracy as its weapons. Its greatest weakness was its assumption that the target would stand alone. Amara's victory was not in a courtroom verdict or a public apology, though those were important. Her victory was in the transformation of her own story. She ceased to be just a victim and became a witness, an advocate, and finally, an architect of a new system to protect others. Minjun's victory was in realizing that his legacy was not the empire he inherited, but the integrity he could build from its broken pieces. This case exposes a harsh reality that extends far beyond a hospital in Seoul. It speaks to anyone who has ever felt the cold weight of institutional pressure, who has been told to be quiet for their own good, who has been made to feel small for doing something right. The tools may differ: a forged document, a whispered threat, a manipulated narrative, but the objective is the same: to enforce silence through fear. What remains is a question for all of us. When we see injustice woven into the fabric of authority, do we look away, calling it someone else's war? Or do we recognize that the only thing that ever changes such systems is the collective, courageous decision to no longer play by their rules? Amara and Minjun chose the latter, at tremendous personal cost, and in doing so, they redefined what was possible. Their story is still being written, day by day, in the work of a clinic and the governance of a company. It is a testament to the fact that some fires don't just destroy, they forge. They burn away what is false and leave behind what is strong and real and worth fighting for. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a story of resilience, strategy, and the high cost of doing the right thing. If this documentary resonated with you, if it reminded you of a battle you've faced or a system you've questioned, we want to hear about it. Drop your thoughts, your stories, or even a word of advice for Amara in the comments below. Your perspective adds to this conversation. If you believe in supporting storytelling that goes beyond the surface, that unpacks the complex mechanics of power and justice, please help this channel grow. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more documentaries that aren't afraid to ask the hard questions. We are a community here, built on curiosity and a shared desire to understand the world a little better. Until next time, remember, the most powerful stories are not about the strength we are born with, but the strength we discover when we have no other choice but to stand.